Thank you everyone for coming tonight. This is very exciting. I'm glad everyone's here to join us. Presenting tonight on what can teachers do to support an inclusive environment with subtle supports that work for everyone. My name is Marcia Questel. I'm a BCBA, and I have been working with kids with various needs, autism mainly, but also a variety of other needs for almost 20 years. And I have 3 kids of my own who all have their own learning differences. And I think it's important to note that we are going to be talking about a variety of needs today. So this isn't necessarily diagnosis specific or autism specific. It's really about inclusion. So we want to talk about what we can do that really does work for everyone. And we'll begin by kind of saying that every child does have their own unique set of learning needs. Obviously, some children require more support than others, and sometimes their learning needs are more intense than others. However, you as teachers are never going to be in a room of cookie cutter kids. We all know that already. So just note that this presentation is really for all types of teachers in all types of settings, whether that be your homeschool, your remote school, your in-person general ed, your special ed, and any type of grade. So anybody could benefit from this, and I think we'll learn a lot. Okay, so, all right. There is a way to get the BCB CEUs. We are ACE BACB approved. During the presentation, we'll give 3 keywords. Please make note of the keywords when we give them. They won't be repeated. I can't put them in the chat. I can't add them to the slides if you're getting the slides from us. So you will need to stay for the duration. That's how we keep track of attendance and make sure that the attendees have been here for the whole time. So you'll write down your keywords and your certificate number and send it to ray@abaskills.com. And you'll have a copy of the PowerPoint slides and any additional materials. And this is for all of our workshops. This is how we do it. And if you are watching on Facebook Live or you see our YouTube video, this is free. It's something that we're providing for all viewers anywhere. There's no, purchase required of any kind if you're just trying to gain use of the content. So we want to make sure we're putting out a lot of free content to support teachers and support parents. And the ABA Skills YouTube channel is chock full of it. So you will be able to find lots of lengthy workshops and even quick tips on the ABA Skills YouTube channel, all for free. And we do it live on Facebook. And of course, if you're getting the CEUs, there's just a quick nominal fee, and you would just send those keywords and your certificate number to ray@abaskills.com. Okay, so an outline of our goals. Consider learning differences that exist for individuals and small groups within any inclusive classroom, and recognize the need to step away from didactic instruction and into more modern approaches to educating today's students. Develop user-friendly strategies for differentiated instruction for these various learners. Create classroom management strategies that are easy to develop and remain consistent in utilizing, promoting a more supportive environment for all students. And begin recognizing opportunities to supplement the classroom environment with proactive strategies that support the most vulnerable or struggling students that also benefit everyone. Your chances of knowing or teaching someone with a learning disability is very high. 2.3 million students are diagnosed with specific learning disabilities and receive services under IDEA. This represents 35% of all students receiving special education services. 75 to 80% of special education students identified as LD have their basic deficits in language and reading. And 60% of adults with severe literacy problems have undetected or untreated learning disabilities. So there's a chance that every single person who views this video knows someone with a learning disability. Chances are very, very high. And for teachers and professionals, you are more than likely going to encounter learners with various learning disabilities throughout your career. So here's some types of learning differences. I'm not going to read them all out, but they are auditory processing disorder, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia, language processing disorder, nonverbal learning disabilities, visual perceptual, visual motor deficit. So children who exhibit these types of differences, you know, there's characteristics that come with them. Someone with auditory processing disorder might have problems with, you know, processing the noises in the room or processing the language, you know, trouble knowing where some sound is coming from, difficulty making sense of sounds. Dyscalculia has to do with math skills, dysgraphia with writing and fine motor skills, dyslexia with reading and language processing skills. Language processing disorder really is about that, right? It's about understanding language, making use of language. Obviously, that'll impact reading comprehension and verbal expression. Nonverbal learning disabilities really is about those motor, visual, spatial, social skills, and visual perceptual, visual motor deficit is really interpreting visual information and drawing. So this person might make mistakes in writing, reverse letters, too tight grip on the pencil or pen, and poor hand-eye coordination. So your job is to make learning possible and effective for every single child in your room. Again, you will likely have a variety of learners in your room, many of whom, again, based on those statistics, will have some sort of diagnosed learning disability. And your job is to make sure that they all are able to learn effectively in your classroom or in whatever setting you're in. Okay, so our first keyword is consider. I'll give you a second to write that down. Consider. All right, moving on. Let's begin by building a strong foundation. We all want the best for every student, right? We all go into teaching thinking, you know, I'm going to light up minds. That's why I love that light bulb picture. I'm gonna, you know, help kids have that spark for learning. I want every child to, you know, remember me as their good teacher. Nobody goes into teaching thinking, you know, I just want to go in and out, punch in and out every day, and the kids will just learn what they learn. And if I miss some, I miss them. Nobody wants that. So, but some really important components of inclusive education are missing in a lot of rooms. And I've been observing in classrooms for years and years and years, right? And so I've seen it. And even really good teachers with really big hearts are missing some really key foundations to make their room as inclusive as it could be. So we will discuss, what does inclusion mean? What does the law have to say about it? What does appropriate mean in the law? And we will discuss issues related to instructional settings, collaboration, instruction, and continuum of support. And I have to plug, Dr. Sarah Heller just did a really amazing job with collaborative team models in schools. She gave a great workshop on that, which again is available for free on the YouTube. So what does inclusion mean and what does it not mean? Here are a few definitions, right? Simply stated, inclusive education means that all students are full and accepted members of their school community, in which their educational setting is the same as their non-disabled peers wherever appropriate. So think about that same word, right? Their educational setting is the same as their non-disabled peers. I think when we consider special education, that is not what we think about. We don't think, oh, they're in the same room as everyone else. I think that most of us, especially growing up in, you know, the last couple decades, have seen that special education is usually a lot less inclusive than that. So inclusive education is the most effective way to give all children a fair chance to go to school, learn and develop the skills they need to thrive. Inclusive education means all children in the same classrooms in the same schools, and that's from UNICEF, right? And I think that, again, when we think of inclusion, sometimes we might be thinking about small opportunities, getting kids mixed in with their neurotypical peers when possible. And of course, that kind of, you know, whenever appropriate or like when possible is the key to this whole statement, right? That we are blending in kids with learning disabilities or with challenges to their neurotypical peers when we can. And that amount of flexibility is, I think, what drives a lot of the lack of inclusion that could otherwise be possible. So what does the law say? The law does not use inclusion. And I just want to say a lot of this is from rights law. And that is such a great question and answer format link that I put in the slides. So anyone who gets our slides will be able to just click on that. But if you just go to rightslaw.com, you'll be able to find it. This is the LRE FAQs. So the law does not use inclusion, right? It uses least restrictive environment. LRE means that to the maximum extent appropriate, school districts must educate students with disabilities in the regular classroom with appropriate aids and supports referred to as supplementary aids and services, along with their non-disabled peers in the school they would attend if not disabled, unless a student's IEP requires some other arrangement. And of course, students have a right to FAPE, free appropriate public education. So every child in America has the right to go to free public school that is appropriate to their needs, and as much as possible, schools should place them in the school that they would typically attend to the extent that they possibly can, right? That should be the first goal. Having children diagnosed with learning disabilities does not mean that they should automatically be placed in a separate school with a longer bus ride, excluded from their peers on the bus, and put into a small van every day to go for some long trip to some faraway school in a separate setting. That is not what the law says. And yet, that is most often what a lot of parents experience. They have a child with a special need. Immediately, the recommendation is to do those things. So if you're encountering that, understand that that is not the law, and that you have a right to push and really advocate for your student to attend the same school that they would normally attend, because there's a lot of social opportunity there. Those are the students that live in their neighborhood. Those are the local kids, right? They could be the kids on their block, could be their siblings in the same house, or their cousins from the next, couple blocks over. So it's really important that students are able to attend in the same settings that they normally would as often as possible. What does appropriate mean in the law, right? This is, again, one of those big flexible words that we have to not take advantage of. The overriding rule in placement is that each student's placement must be individually determined, of course, based on their abilities and needs, and that the program of instruction and related services reflected in each student's IEP forms a basis for the placement decision. So in determining if a placement is appropriate under IDEA, the following factors are relevant. The educational benefit to the student from regular education in comparison to the benefits of special education. Now that is a huge factor, and that is often why students with learning needs are placed in a special education room, because it is smaller. There are teachers who are specifically trained in providing special education services and know how to really tailor the curriculum to those students. And they have the supports in those classes to deal with the need to work one-on-one with a student when they are having behavioral challenges, or when they are really struggling with a certain skill academically. So typically there's some extra staffing in the room, and typically they're highly trained teachers who are, working to meet the needs of those students. And so sometimes there's a huge benefit to being in a special education classroom, but that has to be based on the educational benefit to that individual student. The benefit to the disabled student from interacting with non-disabled students, right? So we have to consider, if those students are in that special education classroom, they are not in their neurotypical, regular classroom. And there could be a real loss of social opportunity from that decision. And that is something that must be considered when we're making this individualized decision. The degree of disruption of the education of other students resulting in the ability to meet the unique needs of the student with a disability. So some people think that you cannot be discussing what's going on with other students, when you're doing an IEP for one? Yes, you can. It is in the law that if this child is causing a lot of disruption to other students' education, that may be a valid reason to place them into a more restrictive environment, because they are then, robbing these other students of the opportunity to have their rights, right? They also have a right to a free, appropriate public education. So does that mean that any students with behavioral issues should be placed in a special education setting? Again, no. This is an individualized decision. And to the degree that a student's behaviors improve, like let's say that it's based on someone's really intense exhibiting behaviors. Perhaps those behaviors are mediated and come down to zero, and they have a pretty good handle on their grade level academics. The push should then be always to immediately start transitioning back into the regular education system, out of special education, again, to the extent possible. And it is a very individualized decision. So some more on this. What does appropriate mean in the law? School districts may not make placements based on the following: category of disability. So we do not place students in a special setting based on a particular disability. We don't house students together based on their disability. That is not appropriate. The configuration of the delivery system, how they're going to deliver education, does not determine where the student is placed. The availability of educational or related services. So you can't say, oh, we're going to put your child in typical education because our 12 is full. Let's say they have a 12-1-2 for special education, it's full. So we're going to put no, you cannot do that. Or availability of space or administrative convenience, right? These types of things cannot be part of the conversation when you're determining what's best for an individual student. If you don't have the available staff or locations, you need to make them. That cannot be the determining factor for the students receiving their individualized education and FAPE. So let's talk about instructional setting. These are a series of questions in the next couple of slides, and I thought that they were so well done, I wanted to include them all. I'm going to hop around a little bit, but they're really all very good questions when it comes to inclusion. So are students educated at the same school they would be, right? That's something that we already discussed. Is the general education classroom at their enrolled grade level the first consideration when the instructional setting is discussed? Are the facilities used by special populations comparable? That's really important. That comes down to discrimination. If we're thinking that, one setting is not as wonderful as the other setting, that's not acceptable. Is the classroom climate inviting and welcoming and supportive of all students? Are decisions made on a student's needs rather than labels or available services? And then more about collaboration. Is there a vision? This one I really love. Is there a vision of shared ownership where all students are considered our students? That is not something I always see. I think that teachers often are either forced into or fall into their own educational silos, where they say, oh, we're the special education crew, they're the typical education crew, they don't know what we do, we don't know what they do, and the school itself feels very segregated. We really want to make sure that our whole building is a home, an educational home for all students, where all students are treated equally, and that all staff feel that they're all our students. Because as much collaboration as you can have, that's going to help bridge more inclusive opportunities for students with learning needs or behavioral needs, because they will be constantly seeing and talked to and invited by the regular education staff. Are general education and special populations teachers members of grade level department teams, and do they regularly plan together? Same thing. There's maybe the 5th grade teachers that all collaborate on, oh, we're doing 5th grade theme of whatever, presidents. And we're all going to have a multiplication fluency game, right? Where all of the kids get to participate and see who can win the most matches. Are the special education students who are at that grade level invited to participate in those games? Are they being given, the same opportunities to collaborate, and the staff to collaborate with the 5th grade staff, or are they kind of over there, right? That's not inclusive. That is very segregated, and it is really common. So if you are working in a school that feels that way, and you don't have this level of collaboration going on, start having some small conversations with people. You don't have to go shake the big trees and, really see how it all falls out. You need to start having small conversations and get the ball rolling. Talk to your administration when you can, after you've already talked to a few other people, to see how they feel about it. Because it is everyone's responsibility. Even if those students are not in your room, it is still your responsibility as a staff member of that school to make sure that it is the most inclusive environment possible for anyone who walks in the door. So are all faculty members knowledgeable of each of their students' IEPs or BIPs? If there's a student who has some degree of behavior that requires a formal BIP, do they only have a paraprofessional or a special educator that's super familiar with how to run it? And does that mean that if they are to push into another classroom for an inclusive opportunity, that that person has to come with them because the other staff don't know how to treat that behavior or respond to that behavior? That would not be as inclusive as it could be, because the least restrictive environment would mean that they can push into that inclusive space without having a shadow following them. And sometimes, right, again, especially if there's some type of dangerous behavior going on, you 100% need an extra set of hands in the room. But definitely consider proximity, because adult proximity to students decreases their social interaction. Think about yourself in school trying to whisper to a friend or pass notes. As soon as the teacher comes by, everybody doesn't do anything, doesn't say anything, right? Students are trying to mingle and talk and interact. Having a big adult shadow next to the child with special needs is going to deter other students from talking to them. So if you have a paraprofessional assigned to one of your students or to your child, definitely bring up proximity, that they're only as close as they really need to be. And at best, they would kind of trail in after the student's already there, circle the room, and also be present maybe when that student isn't there, to further reduce the pairing that that adult is here for that child. If they can kind of float in and, check out other students' work and get to know the other kids in that class, and they like this person and this person knows their name, then that adult will be more likely to be welcome and the kids will be more comfortable with them there. If the student with special needs comes into the room and there's this stranger following them, that is absolutely going to reduce the social interactions and the social opportunity for that student, and definitely is not inclusive. And let's talk about instruction. Do teachers use a variety of research-based instructional strategies, such as multi-level instruction, cooperative learning, activity-based instruction, etc., to reach all students? Is differentiated instruction the predominant instructional methodology used in classrooms rather than lecture-based instruction? We have to get away from that. We have to get away from didactic instruction where I just say things and whoever gets it, and I will grade you accordingly. That is unacceptable, right? It's 2021. We're not doing that anymore. If you're still doing that, or you know someone who's doing that, that has to change immediately, like yesterday, because there's way too much research out there to show what works for students and what doesn't. And for sure, that didactic, lecture-based instruction does not work for children. It just doesn't, right? It may for some, but you're totally missing the boat on a lot of students if that's how you're doing it. And absolutely differentiated instruction, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, is the way to go. Do teachers understand the difference between accommodations and modifications? Is there a campus-wide behavioral support system in place at the school? That is really valuable because then everybody is part of the same strategy. That's like a really, really, really big group contingency that everybody is aware of. And it also, again, breeds more of that inclusive community environment when everybody has the same kind of staff overseeing the big picture. Do teachers have a variety of rich resources, materials, and technologies to support our learners, right? So, I mean, that's a funding issue. And some schools have more money than others. Some schools don't have a ton of funding. Teachers are really strapped and are creating materials in the middle of the night because they don't have the funding available from their school. And of course, they're already strapped and can't just keep buying materials with their own money. Of course, we know that lots of teachers spend tons of money on their own materials, and that can be really costly. So what it comes down to is DIY. We have teachers who are just constantly spending hours creating materials for students in order to help differentiate for them. So a way around that is something we'll talk about later, is to do that more broadly, kind of more proactively, so you're not constantly having to reinvent the wheel. And a continuum of support. Our external supports provided in advance of instruction to promote student success rather than as a reactive measure. Are there in-class support options for students with special needs, such as natural or formal peer support, intermittent support from teachers or teacher assistants, or formal collaborative teaching, two teachers sharing instruction, right? Collaborative classes are really common these days, and they are awesome. I have been in a ton of collab or collaborative classes where there's a special educator and a regular ed teacher in the room, and there's a real big mix of students. And to me, that should be a lot more often. We should have a lot more of those classes growing across the country because they work not just for the special ed students, but for the regular ed students. They are helpful and they grow professional development wise for the staff. And it just is a more supportive environment. Typically what I've seen in those classrooms is very, very positive. Do service personnel such as OTs, PTs, and speech pathologists provide services within the general ed classroom when appropriate? We call that the push-in. When and where and how can push-in services replace services where there's pull-out? A lot of parents, in fact, I think are hesitant to have their students get a push-in rather than a pull-out, because the pull-out is like a tutoring session where it's more one-on-one or maybe a small group, and they know that their child is going to get really close attention from that expert professional, and that they are not distracted by whatever else is going in the room. And maybe they feel like it's a little less stigmatizing because the other students can't see and hear what's going on. However, the cost is that they're out of the room when they could otherwise be building in and building on support that is based on what's happening already. And that may lead to more generalizable behaviors and skills, and may also afford the child more social opportunity and more opportunity to thrive and shine in their room, rather than feeling like, oh, I have to leave to go do this other thing that nobody knows about and it's like mysterious. Is there benefit to both? Of course, but we do have to be mindful about the inclusive versus the exclusive small group instruction being a pull-out or a push-in. If a student leaves the classroom, is it for targeted support only that could not be provided in the classroom? Same idea. Could this be done in the room? Yes or no, why or why not? And we have to make that decision really, really carefully. So 7 quick observations. All students are engaged in meaningful work that supports their instructional goals. Learner objectives, activities, and rules are positively stated and clearly posted. A variety of instructional strategies, materials, technology, and groupings are being used. Services are brought to the general ed classroom where the staff works together to meet student needs. Students with special needs are not stigmatized by adult supports, and student-to-student interactions are evident. Assignments are purposeful, involve meaningful work, and maintain rigor. The classroom arrangement supports positive behavior and learning. Students can access materials with adequate room for small groups and quick transitions. Number 5 is the thing that I touched on earlier, where the child is not stigmatized by the adult support. That could be by the adult person in the room, or it could be by supportive materials that only they are given. Those things should not be happening. And, you know, I'll have a really big statement on that a little bit later, but make sure that students are not being stigmatized when they need something, and that they are having student-to-student interactions when and wherever possible. So what does inclusion not mean? Okay, so this top circle here is inclusion. Everybody's all mixed together, and that's wonderful. That's the best. That's what we want. It does not mean having students with disabilities in proximity to neurotypical students, right? All around the outside here, that's exclusion. That means all of the neurotypical kids or the, general ed kids are in one space and everybody else is kind of watching from the outside. That's very sad. And whenever we are excluding students to their own separate space, this is what we should be thinking about, that this is what's happening. They're observing life from the outside. And if that is what's happening in the building, it has to stop. It does not mean having students in a group near another group. What does this look like? To me, it looks like a lot of specials that I see. The art classroom, where all of the typical ed students are in the front of the room, and maybe the back 2 tables are reserved for a few of these special education students who are coming in sometimes post transition in the hallway because they need their own time to get there. And often they are surrounded by, 2 or 3 or 4 adults, and they are not engaging with the general ed teacher the same way everybody else is. And typically they're somewhere in the back, just in case they have behaviors that they don't disrupt the other students. So is that a meaningful inclusion? No, it is not. And we have to kind of stop talking about art and gym and library as, means to include students in a way that is meaningful, because it rarely is. If students are kind of walked in and maintained in one spot, that is not helpful. If they need that level of support where there's several adults coming in, and we think that the special time, the art or library or whatever, music is going to be a good time for them to come in, then why can't they sit anywhere that they want, right? That doesn't make sense. So we definitely have to think about how we're arranging the environment and how that feels for students who may have all of the information about what's happening and feel the stigma and not be able to participate in a way that they otherwise should be given the opportunity to do so. So inclusion also does not mean having a group of students collected together within a large group. So that looks like the cafeteria to me. This integration piece looks like the cafeteria, where you have like a table of students that's surrounded by other students, but still, not fully included and mixed in with everybody else. And of course, there may be reasons for that. There may be very valid reasons to keep certain people together in one space, but and also just logistically, a lot of classes have their own table. Like this is Mrs. B's table, this is Mr. C's table, and so on. So if you're in a special education class, you're naturally going to be sitting with your class in the cafeteria, and that's understandable. But if we're considering the cafeteria as a social opportunity, We can't expect that these students are going to just be looking around and starting to imitate social behaviors that they see happening in the cafeteria. That is not valuable time. So we have to definitely be careful about that and mindful about that. Let's consider the big picture. You need your classroom to function with some level of normalcy and be a place where children feel comfortable. They have a right to a space where their needs are being met. So how can we organize the environment? That's something I keep talking about. Broadly consider light. For some students, the flickering of very bright lights can be very distracting and disruptive to them. Can you make some light changes in your room? Maybe, maybe not. Think about it. It's a big picture thing that's just hanging right above you. So it could be something that you adjust. And I've seen, especially in the high schools, where staff bring in some lighting from their homes, or they get them at yard sales, and it makes a nice kind of softer home-like environment for students, and they really enjoy it. So, ease of the transitional space versus crowding. Think about the layout of the room. Can students get from one place to the next in the room when they need materials or when they're getting ready to go to another place in the building? How easy is it for them to get around? If you're thinking about students with motor difficulties, which again, many students may have, or if you're thinking of students who have, let's say, crutches or a wheelchair, how easy is it for them to just get around the room? They should be able to do that to the same degree anybody else can. So if you need to rearrange your room to make that easier, then do so. Use of the space, rows or groups, text or pictures. So that's a little bit more detail about your space. Are you putting kids together in groups or rows? Why? You can't just make that decision arbitrarily. We should be thinking about the social opportunities that groups versus rows can create. We should be thinking about the text use in the room, and are we using pictures? Because a lot of, especially in higher grades, teachers tend to refrain from pictures, thinking that it's babyish, but the use of graphics, even just cool looking pictures or even just imagery or shapes, can help a student remember the text meaning that is paired with it. So be sure to have careful consideration when you're making those types of decisions. Clean the environment from clutter. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a home or in a school where the clutter abounds, and it is really disruptive, not just for the students learning, but just for their use of the space. They are not sure where things go, or it's just visually too overwhelming for them, and it's very distracting. Can you get storage boxes? Can you tuck things away? Can you organize them and label them? Again, go ahead and just throw a picture with the label. It doesn't have to just be text. Make sure everybody can quickly and easily find what they need, and that the room itself is not overly distracting and cluttered. Scaffold your room for impulse control. There are students who will grab things, who will dart across the room, move around a lot, who have impulse control deficits. And that is very common, especially in the younger grades, but also moving up through the higher grades. We find students who just have trouble inhibiting certain impulsive behaviors and keeping a calm body and doing what they need to do and staying on task. That can be really challenging for a lot of students, again, regardless of diagnosis. So make sure that your room is scaffolded, that meaning that you are prepared for students who have difficulty controlling their impulses. Do you have just scissors and paintbrushes lying around? You shouldn't. Those should be put away. I don't think anyone's necessarily going to get hurt, but somebody could just decide, hey, I'm going to cut my shirt today, or I'm going to cut this random art picture that was somebody else's, or I'm just going to cut up random shreds of paper. Or they could just find a paintbrush and just start kind of doodling around with it. Make sure, again, specifically in the younger grades, but also moving up through the higher grades, that you are really thinking about these things when you're creating a space. Especially if you are a teacher who works in a special with music, musical instruments, delicate things, art, library books. Think about ways that you can prepare the environment for a variety of learners. And consider your ability to circulate. You should not be standing in front of the room, right? So you should be able to move easily throughout the space and kind of reach any student at any point. You should quickly and easily be able to get around. If there's backpacks in the middles of the rows and just tons of clutter in the room, that needs to all get cleared out. Find hooks, spaces to put things, places to tuck things under the desk. Create proactive rules and routines for students so that they know where things go and know how to put things away, so that when you're moving around, you're not having to deal with any of that. You can quickly and easily get around your room. That's really, really important. All right, your second word is environmental. Okay, again, that cannot be repeated after this. I'm going to say it again, but after this can't be repeated. Make sure you write it down. So the second word is environmental. Okay. So consider smaller groups and individual needs. Small groups. How many? Why? Don't just say, oh, I only have 5 diagrams, so I'm going to make 5 groups of 5. That's a pretty big group. And depending on the students that you have in your room, that might be a little chaotic. Make extra copies. So if you want a large group dynamic because you specifically want someone to be the writer, someone to be the speaker, someone to be the team leader, so if you have rules and roles for every person in the group, then your size would be appropriate to fit. But if you are just arbitrarily making small groups, think again. Think about making pairs. Think about making, triads. And make sure that you are just being decisive about these things. Having everyone go find a partner could be really scary for certain students. If you can create a quick system, and it doesn't have to be the same all the time, we don't want to promote a ton of rigidity, but if you can create a quick system of rules for everyone to organize themselves, that would be the best. Are you considering providing graphic organizers for everyone, or just those with that in their IEP? For students with learning difficulties, we often see things like visual supports, graphic organizers in their IEPs. So why not just make those for everybody? Because everyone would probably benefit from them. Scaffold it and make it available for everybody. And then if some kids don't need it, they don't need it. But at least, again, you're not just walking over and saying, here, this is just for you. That is stigmatizing. We can't be doing that. Everyone stop doing that if you're doing that. Immediately start dispersing the materials around the room. Are you considering direct instruction practices? Direct instruction is talked about with 2 capital letters or 2 small letters. So direct instruction, like the big direct instruction, is a very well-researched, very specific set of steps. Direct instruction, kind of small DI, is the use of that in a looser sense. But basically it follows these steps. Set the stage for learning, that's the introduction and review. Model the expected learning outcomes by providing clear explanations and examples, really, really clear. Guided practice, monitor and engage pupils with assigned learning tasks. So you are doing it with them. You're not just giving it to them. Like, oh, I just taught you a lesson, here you go, fill out this worksheet. No, you are modeling, doing, actively rehearsing. Often when we think about the capital letter DI, the real DI, we often hear those really clear systems where students are echoing something that the teacher says. I say this, you say that, and they go back and have a really strict routine. If you're using the loose lowercase di, then we're talking about just using guided practice within the lesson every single time, that you're, again, not just teaching and giving assessments, that you're working on it with them and promoting rehearsal and promoting engagement. Closure, bring the lesson to a conclusion by highlighting what was covered. Hit the key points again. Make sure that you're checking in with your students all around the room, making sure that they understand those basic foundational concepts that were covered. Then you give them the independent practice. That's provide learning tasks that are independent of teacher assistance. That's like the assessment piece. A lot of teachers use something like an exit ticket, right? Where as they're walking out of the room, again, in the higher grades, junior high, middle school, high school, the students have to hand the teacher an exit ticket before they walk out the door. That's something that they've done on their own to show their work independently. And assess pupil progress. Evaluation doesn't just mean mark a grade. It means really track the grade. Look for trends. Evaluate what you're looking at. When you get an assessment back, the assessment isn't just an assessment of the student, it's an assessment of your teaching. So if you have students who are scoring low across the board, you need to change how you're teaching it. That doesn't just mean they're all not paying attention. There's something you need to do to change what you're doing. So when you hand out tests, the test of you also as the teacher. So keep that in mind when you're giving those evaluations, that I know teachers are sick of being evaluated by administrations and higher up people dealing with funding and all of that. But make sure that you are keeping what's really important at the forefront every single time you assess a skill. Doesn't have to be some big humongous test in order for you to get a feeler on how the students are doing with it. So it's informal assessments, right? Informal assessments. You can walk around the room. You can ask questions. Those are all informal assessments. Formal assessments is when you can actually get a product back that you're grading. Keep those evaluations in mind and make sure that you're using them really, really carefully. So here's a plug, but it's a helpful one. Another video of ours, using diverse learners' IEP goals to create whole classroom management strategies, covers a lot more of the next couple of slides in depth. So I'm going to review a couple of the points that we hit in that video here. Definitely check out that video because we talk about RTI, a lot more goal setting, writing meaningful IEP goals, supporting the classroom, and other things. So do check out our other video, using diverse learners' IEP goals to create whole classroom management strategies, because I really get into whole group contingencies, behavior plans that work for the whole class, as well as really integrating individual IEPs to create teaching strategies. And we're going to just highlight, I love these, so I've used them before, I'm using them again. Design considerations. This is from Home Office Digital. I'm not going to give them each their own individual slide like I've done before, but just to hit them up. Design for users with all various needs. When you are creating materials, or if you're creating something online for them to interact with, really be careful about how you're doing it. Don't just do it in a way that works for you. It needs to work for everybody. Use plain language. Don't use, idioms and figures of speech as much. Use closed captioning if there's videos. Make sure that you're using large buttons instead of really small spaces that students have to navigate with a mouse really, really carefully. Make sure that you're using really clear color differences and not all subtle things. We have so many students who have color blindness or visual impairment. Make sure that you're doing those things for all variety of learners. This says specific to the autistic spectrum, but it not necessarily only fits there. There's a few things here that bridge across various needs. Make sure that your text is plain and easy to understand, not all fancy fonts. Students with reading issues or with dyslexia are not going to have an easy time with that. Make sure that you are using text that is dynamically different from the background, not subtle changes like that. And make sure that you are, this one to me is the best one, because I think all students, especially now living in pandemic times, have some level of anxiety. Make sure that you're not putting arbitrary timelines on things and making students jump to get things done if they could be a little easier. Make sure that you're really preparing assignments so that students aren't having a tough time with it right off the bat. Some students have anxiety that is sometimes difficult to plan around. But to the extent that you can be really mindful of the anxiety that students have, and again, especially these days, not only with the pandemic, with pressure that's put on students at younger and younger and younger ages. I think we're all aware of that trickle-down effect that's happening, where students have to get into college, then they have to do really well in high school, so then they have to do really well in junior, and so on, because we are preparing students for a world that has never been seen before. We have to make sure that we're not driving that right into our classrooms and that we're not just another speaker box of that pressure. Students have to have teachers who are really supportive of them and who are really prepared to help them and support them and be systematic. Don't ask them open-ended, weird questions. Make sure that you're being really clear in your expectations. Make sure that it's easy for them to follow a rubric or to know what the expectation is when they're completing assignments from you. Okay, so begin with RTI in mind. This is review. If you don't know, I will just quickly touch on it. You know, you should have universal supports that can really be in place in virtual or in-person settings. Visual supports, organization of materials and lists, materials that engage students in multiple modes of participation, differentiated instruction and assessments, clear and concise language. A lot of teachers will use differentiated instruction where they'll make sure that they're using many modes of instruction and all that, but their assessments are all the same. And they may argue that, well, I can't give so-and-so an easier test than so-and-so, X, Y, and Z. Fine, I understand that argument, but can you just change the test to suit the needs of more learners? Because if you have a few learners in the room that are going to have trouble with a test that's all cluttered in one space rather than really larger print that's printed on a few pages, maybe less problems, maybe a little more time to complete it, why not give that to everybody? It's not that hard to create kind of universal ideas that really fit the needs of many students in the room and will benefit others as well. Give them extensions, give them, you know, extra assignments that or fun tasks that they can do when they're done if they don't need the extra time. It's really important that we don't just continue to think of it as this didactic world, and if you don't fit the mold, then that's your problem. And it's very unfortunate because I do see it around when I'm observing in classrooms. And it's sad, and it's kind of unprofessional, and it's very outdated. So do keep in mind that there's usually some simple changes that you can make that will start broadly and work their way down to helping more and more individuals. This is the RTI model, classroom, group, individual. Again, you start with a big class-wide change that will probably help a lot of people, and then you take a small group that you make some more changes for, and then you make some more changes for an individual. You should not be just putting out fires with every individual student when they have a unique issue. That's a waste of time. And again, this can be done in person, remote, or hybrid. You can make sure that you're using class-wide contingencies, and again, this is touched on the other workshop, that work for everybody, even if you're doing a Zoom session. And I'm hoping and praying that we're not going to be doing that for too much longer, but even to the extent that we are, and for the students that remote schooling works for, make sure that you're using RTI when you're thinking about your strategies. I have this exercise called Seeing Blue. When we see the same behaviors from a student, we begin looking for those behaviors. Everybody who's been teaching for any amount of time knows that that is the case. When you have a student who exhibits certain really frustrating behaviors, you just start looking for it. And typically what I'll do is I'll have everybody kind of stop the presentation, look around the room, look for something blue. If you start looking for blue, you will find it in the environment. If you change the color to yellow, start looking around the room, you will find it. I'm not going to spend time doing that right now, but you get the idea. When you start looking for, oh, that kid always does that, it becomes a very bad cyclical environment where you're expecting it, they do it, you respond the same, you expect it, they do. Start changing it and look for what that child does right. You'll have to give them some extra attention to make sure that you're picking up on what they need and why those behaviors pop up. And of course, if they have special needs and you can work with a behaviorist or some other special educator to help you with this, that might be what needs to happen to get a functional analysis. But even if not, if you just have a child in your room who doesn't have any type of classification and you don't have any support for them, but they're engaging in some type of behavior that you just keep on seeing and then keep on looking for, flip it on its head, start looking for the good things that kid does immediately. Praise those things, proactively support that child, try to prevent the behaviors as much as you can, and then react to it when needed. If you have a wealth of classroom, group, and individual supports for that student, you will likely prevent a ton of things and then you won't have to deal with them. And of course, that means that you're going to have to be giving your full attention to your students constantly, which is a lot of work, and you already do. But if you can flip it around and start providing more and more praise statements, more and more supportive materials, more and more individualized attention to students, you will have that stitch in time saves 9, because you won't be having to respond to all those individual fires constantly. It's actually really, really helpful when you frame things that way. So what can we do? Rewards do not equal reinforcement. You cannot just throw rewards at a kid and say like, hey, if everybody fills the marble jar, we'll have a pizza party. That doesn't necessarily mean it's reinforcement. It might be awesome, might be a great reward, but it does not guarantee an increase in desirable behaviors. Are the kids motivated for that? You know, $1 for a rich kid, what if they eat pizza all the time? They don't care about the pizza party. Think about that when you're designing a reinforcement system. How soon can they get it? And how hard is it? How hard do they have to work to get the thing that you're trying to give them? And, you know, how soon will they get it? If you tell me I have to run a marathon in order to get an ice cream sandwich, I'm not going to run that marathon. If you tell me I have to run a marathon to get $1 million, then I might run that marathon. If you tell me I have to finish this test before 2 p.m. in order to get 20 minutes extra recess time, hey, I might do that. That sounds awesome. So keep these things in mind when you're designing your reinforcement systems. Further reading, motivating operations, temporal contiguity, and response effort, differential reinforcement. Okay, I'm going to quickly blow over these because I have talked about them in the other workshop. Positive means you're adding something that is desirable to the students. Negative means you're taking away something undesirable. It does not equal bad. Negative reinforcement is like taking a break, getting out of something. Hey, if you guys all bring in your homework tomorrow, I won't give you all homework on Friday, but everybody has to do it. Those kinds of things, getting out of things that the kids want to get out of. And punishment. Basically, don't do it or be very, very careful about it. Punishment has occurred when a response is followed immediately by a stimulus change that decreases the future frequency of similar responses. Remember that not every intended punishment is actually going to reduce the behavior. Common punishments include reprimands, going to the principal's office, calls home, losing recess time. And again, that can be positive or negative. You can add something that is going to reduce the behavior, or hopefully will, or you can remove something that the kids want, right? Negative punishment is used a lot in school. Like, hey, if you guys don't stop talking, then we are going to lose recess. If everybody keeps fooling around, we are not going to the zoo this year. Those types of things. So be mindful of the ethics of punishment and the reinforcing effect it can have on teachers. This is really one of the most important things about punishment, because teachers who punish a lot get a nice amount of relief when they do it. So they yell at kids, are really intense with their reprimands and their punishments, and they make all the kids lose their recess or whatever, and it's quiet. And that is negatively reinforcing for them because it takes away something that they don't want. Again, think about that previous, right? Getting negative reinforcement means getting out of something that you don't want. So this type of thing, you know, those heavy reprimands and that punishing style can be really reinforcing and increase the punishing style. So it actually has a snowball effect of the yelling, which is not good. We don't want that kind of environment for any of our students, special needs, typical, whatever. We don't want to be doing that. So be mindful that when you do it, if it is effective, you're going to do it more. So find, you know, really inhibit that impulse, really avoid doing that, and find other ways to address the behaviors in the room. So mental and emotional health check-ins, regularly check in with your students. Consider adding an entrance or exit ticket every day, or at least once per week, asking, how are you feeling today? Is there anything you'd like to talk or message with your teacher about? This is really important, again, now more than ever, because students are in home situations that they can't get out of if they're on remote, or many students are actually working. High school students are working now more than they used to help supplement income at home, and they are not sleeping as well, and they don't have the access to the respite of going to school to get out of their house. They have additional burdens. There's things going on in the home that maybe teachers aren't aware of, the extra stress and the social isolation of the pandemic. This is still ongoing. I know it's May 2021 right now when I'm giving this workshop, but it is still happening. And there's a ripple effect that may be long lasting for some students. Even if schools return to normal and things like that, there is likely going to be extended effects of the pandemic on many students. And we'd like to mitigate that as much as possible. And teachers are responsible for checking in with their students. So an easy way to do that, that doesn't stigmatize a student who may be facing something, is to just make it normal. Normalize it. Just make it a constant. You can just build it in right now. If you're watching this video and then you're going to start teaching next week, just make it a new normal, make it a new pattern. Hey, I think that this pandemic sucks, and I'm going to build in a routine of us all checking in. And you can decide to tell me I'm fine and you don't want to talk about it, but I'm going to be here checking in with you constantly. You have to balance your own availability to handle that, and you have to balance your own availability to check emails and things like that. Make it normal, because if you notice that a student is going through a struggle and then you suddenly pinpoint them, maybe not within the classroom, but you call them to the side or tell them to hang out after class, or you write them an email and they're not used to hearing from you, that could really add to the drama that they're experiencing or make them feel embarrassed that you know about it. So rather than facing that situation where you're suddenly calling out a student that you haven't had these types of discussions with before, regularly check in with your students. This can help you to bridge the home and school environment, and it can also help you to just foster a proactive relationship with your students, and they will likely respect you more for it. So if you're facing students that have a lot of behavioral challenges or emotional challenges, or get into fights regularly, or just are having truancy, you know what I mean? Then you're already in a reactive position to those issues. Starting proactively, starting fresh and saying, this is now policy, this is what I'm doing for everybody. You can use it as you like, ignore it whenever you want, and come to me only when you need it. I value you, I care about you, I'm here for you. And we're all struggling through this. We're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats, right? We're not all in the same boat. Some people are having an easier time than others, but we're all in the same storm. So I want to make sure that you know I'm here for you. And that type of check-in can be very inclusive, because if you have students who are having emotional issues or behavioral issues and you stigmatize them by pulling them to the side or calling them out, or if they feel embarrassed because even if it's private, you're just checking on them randomly, then that's likely not going to be as effective. Making it a very inclusive, proactive whole class system will definitely provide that supportive environment and that nurturing environment that every student deserves. Remember to ask yourself and your teams, what does appropriately mean anyway? When we say we want students to behave appropriately, that usually comes with our own learning history. Not only are there cultural differences, there are also family and personality differences. Kids are different from each other. Kids are weird, kids are different, kids are whatever they are. We don't want our society to be tons of the same. We don't want everybody to feel like they have to fall in line all the time. That is not what the education system is for. A lot of people think it is. And that is an effect that does happen, but that's not what it's meant for. We're supposed to be reaching our students. We're supposed to be inspiring them. We're supposed to be educating them super, super effectively. So make sure that you're considering that when we say, oh, he's not responding behaviorally or she's not acting appropriately, then question that immediately. If you say, when I ask someone a question, they're supposed to answer me, that's appropriate. Sure, it is. But do they have a way out if they don't want to? And are you respecting their space? Are you being too controlling? Are you invading what they feel is appropriate and imposing your values on them? So do think about these things when you're encountering cultural differences, personality differences, behavioral and learning differences. We have to consider broadly, what does appropriately mean anyway? No intervention should ever be more stigmatizing than the behavior itself. I repeat, no intervention should ever, ever, ever be more stigmatizing than the behavior itself. I've said this before, I will say it again. I don't mind repeating it. It has to be well known and completely agreed upon. We do not impose interventions on students for behaviors that would otherwise not be that stigmatizing. When I was talking before about the paraprofessional following the student into the inclusive space, that is not helpful sometimes. Sometimes it is. But having a student who's followed with their shadow adult could be very stigmatizing. And if their behavior is that they're not responding as socially as they should, or maybe they engage in a little bit of light self-stimulatory behavior or something, like that is not cause for them to have this overarching adult on top of them constantly. Those types of things need to be addressed, but in the least stigmatizing way possible. It could be a lot more stigmatizing to treat a behavior and control it and to address it than to just accept it or work with it or just work with the student to reduce it or increase replacement behaviors or what have you. There's usually a lot of choices, and staff often want to control the situation. And as they exert their control over the situation, the student engages in counter control. You get this tit for tat system happening. I have consulted on many cases where that's happening and there's this obvious tension between the staff and the person, the student. And I go, why are we addressing this anyway? Why is this even an issue? Why is this such a big deal? It's not a big deal. Okay, they're not doing the thing you want them to do, but how can we encourage the change, proactively reinforce the replacement behaviors, or create a better rapport, get them to be excited about your presence, get them to be excited about your intervention or your teaching, and again, completely flip it on its head rather than, you know, having that snowball effect of that punishment and that controlling tendency. Okay, so I do have an example data set that I like to show this because it shows how simple it is. So just throw things into an Excel sheet. So here I just showed putting in some dates. If you highlight the first 3 cells and just drag the box down, it'll autofill for you, which is super cool. And then I'm just putting in behavior. BX is behavior to increase, behavior to decrease. And then you just start putting in. So if you want to increase hand raising and you want to decrease calling out or something for certain sets of students, you just start plugging in the data. Okay, they never raised their hand. Oh, they raised their hand once that day. 2, 3, 2, 3. So maybe it goes down a little bit and you go, oh man, it went down. Oh, then it came back up. Well, let's just say it has some variety of success. Behavior to decrease, let's say, is calling out. You're going to start putting in the data on that same day, but you'd like to see that trend going down rather than going up. It's very high in the beginning, maybe before you start treatment, starts coming down, goes back up a little bit. Ugh, you know, that's annoying. But it goes back up and you're thinking, oh, this was working, but now it's not working. The reason why it's so important to have data is because you can then transfer it into a visual for yourself, for the student even. They can be aware of their own data and how you're collecting it, and for your administration. When you're trying to advocate for support for a student, you can show that the interventions you're doing have been effective. Right, there you go. You say, look, calling out has decreased so much over time, and sure, there's some variety, but the trend is everything. The trend is what we want to see. Then you just move it over to its own sheet, and that'll make it nice and big. There you go. So then you see that there's behaviors that are increasing, and you can say, like, look, there's some variety there, and they had some good days and bad days, but hey, overall, we can see that the behaviors that we want to decrease are coming down, behaviors that we want to increase are going up. And how long does this take? A few minutes. If you are not familiar with using a very quick, easy sheet like Google Sheets or Microsoft, then Excel, then you can reach out to me by email, because this type of thing is very simple, very easy to do, and it really supports teachers if they can start getting used to some basic data collection. And if you're trying to strive for an inclusive environment, you need to show RTI that you are using class-wide, small group, and individual interventions and supports for the students in your room, for your inclusive room. And you want to show some data, some evidence that what you're doing has been effective. Because if you are just saying, oh, this kid is doing this behavior and I can't take it anymore, and you have nothing to show for, oh, I've tried doing this, but there's no evidence. I tried doing this, I tried doing that, nothing was working. How do we know? Maybe on the bad days, maybe on the days when the behaviors were spiking, you gave up on the intervention. Maybe when things were going to start moving in the direction, you changed it again because you didn't have any data. That would be so sad. But if we looked at this kind of behavior coming down, and then on those days when it's spiking up here, we go, oh, this isn't working. Look, it's just going to go right back up. That would be very sad. So we want to make sure that we're gathering some evidence of our inclusive environments, that we are making sure we can showcase that what we're doing is working, and how we're using this RTI model and using these class-wide proactive strategies to make sure all the students feel empowered in that room. Scaffolding support is not a crutch. Students will not become dependent on it if it's done correctly. As I say, sometimes it's a cast. Sometimes you're receiving a student who has never had the proper interventions or the proactive supports to help them thrive. So you have to put in a ton of support right off the bat to help them to grow and to thrive and become independent. And as that healing happens, voila, they're stronger, they're more able to do what they need to do, and you can start removing it, go down to the soft cast, if you will, before going fully off. Most of the time, if it's done well, it's scaffolding. So if you have students who have a variety of needs in your room, you put up a whole bunch of support, let them learn the routines, let them learn the expectations, and then piece by piece, you start increasing your expectations of their independence and removing those extraneous supports, because then they should be thriving. And you use RTI to say, look, I have all these class-wide plans. I'm going to start removing this bit of support or increase this bit of demand for most of these students. In this small group, I'm still going to use these extraneous supports because I want to make sure that they have what they need. And if you are practiced in it, it'll be no problem for you to just keep on administering that to those students who still need it, because you've already been using it class-wide. And it won't be stigmatizing to anybody else because you have an environment of support, and hey, they just don't need it anymore, or they don't feel like using it anymore, but these kids are using it, no problem. Having that least stigmatizing, most supportive space is how we promote inclusion. Differentiated instruction. How are you differentiating? Worksheets and assessments. By text type. Again, are you using weird fonts or unclear background to color? The size of the text. Is it small? Is it hard to read? The spacing between not only the lines of text, but between the sections. Is it clear that these instructions apply to this section and these instructions apply to this? Page setup. Do you have plenty of visuals that are matched to the visuals that you're using while you're teaching to help move over and generalize that this is what we're working on, that same thing that we did together before? Are you making sure that you are differentiating your instruction for your various learners and making sure that your worksheets and your assessments meet their needs, not just, hey, I'm going to throw a test at you? Instruction, ensuring that you're using mnemonic devices. Love them, right? Those are those patterns of speech, the things that help you memorize things. Text paired with vocal instruction, explicit instructions. We behaviorists say very clear SDs, right? SDs are discriminative stimuli. This is what, if I say this, you do this, and this is the outcome. If I say stand up, you all stand up immediately. I say, great job, everybody standing up, line up at the wall. We're gonna get ready to go. Making sure that you are super, super clear on exactly what you want, what the expectation is, and what the consequences for those things. And hopefully you have a very praising, proactive, supportive environment where those expectations are super, super clear to everybody, and you're using explicit instructions and really clear text and mnemonic devices to help everyone learn and keep up and be on pace with you. When you're designing assessments, what number of problems are you using? I find when I ask that question, so many teachers are just like, oh, 20, 10, or something that's easy to divide 100, so it's strange because we don't need a ton of problems to realize that a student doesn't know how to do something or that they totally know how to do it. Why give them a long test unless you absolutely need to? Things like historical facts, scientific processes, these things may require more questions because we need to make sure that all aspects of, say, the historical conflict or the scientific process are mastered. When it comes to math problems, why are we giving 20, 30 math problems? Unless you're trying to assess fluency and you're giving a time test to say, like, how many can you do in 5 minutes? Those types of things are important because you need automaticity to be there. And so you're assessing automaticity and making sure that kids can really pull out those solutions quickly. But a lot of times I find that's very arbitrary, the number of problems that are used in an assessment. And if a student can't do it 1, 2, 3 times, then it's just torture for them to do it 10, 20 times. Can you put graphic organizers in your assessment? Or can you use a graphic organizer as the assessment? Because understanding how to break down the information and lay it out in a graphic organizer might be a really fantastic assessment of the student's comprehension of the topic. And study support. Are you providing study support only for a certain number of students? What if their parents can't get them to school early? What if they have sleep issues and they can't get up early? What if they have to go to football practice after school and they can't stay late? Then don't put students in a bind. If there are a certain number of students that you know need the extra help, you need to build it in. And I know that's a tough challenge because you have a whole bunch of curricula that you need to get through by the end of the year. So we can't just hold up the whole class, right, for those students. But why push the other students through and move at this fast pace if these many students are not understanding the information? Perhaps there's a way to quickly intervene or to differentiate the materials that you're giving them to support them more in the class. And if you're doing it for them, why not just do it for everybody? Because I'm sure there are many students who are just getting by with a ton of effort. And that doesn't mean that they're thriving. So make sure that you're considering these things when you're differentiating your instruction. And your reinforcement, type, frequency, group, see previous workshop, RTI. So how are you providing reinforcement? Is it reinforcing to everybody? Is it increasing the behaviors that you'd like to see for everyone? And if not, how are you addressing that? How are you making small group contingencies for those students who don't respond to the class-wide contingency? How often is reinforcement delivered? Can you provide a couple more supportive, praising statements? Can you provide some additional whatever, star stickers, tokens, whatever it is, to help the students who need it the most? Because if you start thinking about it that way, the changes become pretty clear pretty quickly. And I had a student one time that I will never forget, and I will talk about a ton of times because it was stunning to me, not the behaviors that he was engaging in, but the response that the teachers had when I told them that they had to start attending to him more in the classroom because a lot of his behaviors seemed to be seeking attention and they were disruptive. They said, well, we can't be paying attention to him all day. And I said, you already are. And anyone who's listened to my workshops has heard that, but it is something that will always be with me, and I hope it will always be with many people. They said, we can't always be paying attention to him. I said, you already are. Like, he's engaging in these disruptive behaviors and you're constantly attending to him. Flip it on its head. Pay attention to him more when he's doing the right things, because it's easy to just ignore him when he's quiet, but that is not when you should be ignoring him. Get proactive, prevent things, start thinking about how you can design the environment for the success of the individuals who need the most support. That is how we promote inclusion. So some simple ideas are building in routines. Routines are fantastic. Humans thrive on routines. Make sure that the routines are easy to follow. Make sure that you have a high frequency of prompts, preparing students for routines, and reinforcement. You know, really praising their behavior specifically when they're following routines. And help students prepare for transitions. Make sure that everybody knows what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And make sure that the cues are obvious to everybody and that they're not caught off guard when transitions are about to happen, because that is when a lot of behaviors occur, right? When we're lining up for lunch or when we're coming back from recess, when transitions happen, that's when a lot of behaviors happen. Visual aids, use them constantly. Think about, if you're talking, think about how you can build in some visual support for your students. Pair visuals with mnemonic devices and text cues. So if you have some type of picture, if you pair that visual, if it's shapes, if it's, you know, a cartoon character, doesn't matter. Whatever the visual is that fits what you're trying to teach, if you pair it with a mnemonic device, like a pattern of speech, like, we're going to school, or we're going to recess after lunch. We're going to recess after lunch, and kind of just having that, a visual of a lunchbox and a playground or something, and having a text cue that says recess, then lunch. And this is just a transition preparation. This isn't even an educational piece example. But if you have that image paired with that same exact pattern every single time, and the text cue, it will just help everybody, because that will help them to remember and retain the information. Mnemonic devices help everyone. This is why phone numbers are broken into chunks of 3, 3, and 4. Because when you chunk things up, you're immediately starting to chunk them in your memory. So when we use mnemonic devices and we use chunking and we use these kind of psychological ideas and this well-researched mechanisms for teaching, it'll really help, again, everyone in your inclusive room, not just, you know, low-performing students who really need it, but everybody benefits from these things. Use continuous feedback with your visual aids. Make sure that you are ensuring that students understand the visual, that they're pairing the visual with the lesson or the idea or the concept that you're teaching, and give continuous feedback to make sure it is cemented there. In your feedback and instruction, how can you be more inclusive? Rely less on those didactic instruction styles. I think I've made it very clear that those are no longer acceptable. Encourage groups to be, you know, for working together and for be the teacher opportunities. Have students work together to blend their ideas, to feed off one another, debate things, hash things out. Have students come up and teach the lesson for you and then give them feedback, because if they can teach it and they can do it, then they probably will understand it, right? So if they can tell everybody else how to do it, that's a pretty good example of their understanding of the material. That's not just presentation, like, oh, we're gonna give a PowerPoint. No, like really engage as the teacher. Be a listener yourself and promote question asking. Invite and entice conversation. Listen carefully, don't shut down ideas. If they're wrong, don't just go, oh no, that doesn't make sense. Think about why the student thinks that, because if they're brave enough to be raising their hand and answering, you're lucky. You're a lucky teacher. You're doing a good job. Because if wrong ideas and mistakes are out in the open in your room, that means you have a culture of acceptance and openness and everyone sharing. So wrong answers are actually fine. There's something to work with. How boring is it to just have everybody just rehearsing and regurgitating information? That is not good. That does not help everyone to understand the concept holistically. Arriving at an answer or arriving at a conclusion usually involves some amount of exploration. So invite students into the process and make sure that you're encouraging question asking, you're not knowing, and encouraging bravery in making mistakes and just flying out with questions. If there's any amount of chuckling or pointing or whispering when other students are talking, that needs to be addressed. It needs to be nipped immediately, because that kind of stuff will really decrease the engagement of the student who really might want to be engaged and haven't felt like they could be in the past. So you should be the teacher that starts paving the way for them and starts promoting what a class should look and feel like. So be a good listener in your room and promote question asking. And sometimes subtle is better than loud. There are many apprehensive learners out there. The harder you push and pull, the more they may clam up, okay? Because if a student is apprehensive and doesn't want to answer and you call them out, that could be a very upsetting situation for them, especially because if their anxiety kind of freezes up their cognition and their ability to think through what they're saying, or they stumble over their words, then they're more embarrassed and then they hesitate more next time. So be sure to reach your apprehensive learners, not by just pushing and pulling and trying to get it out of them, because that type of aggressive approach a lot of times can make it worse. Be systematic in your instruction. Make sure that those apprehensive learners or those less engaged learners have those foundational pieces before we just race through to the next topic. Be quiet in your feedback sometimes. So I have a note about bracelets. So, you know, some people wear a lot of bracelets like this, or the cause bracelets, right? Those rubber bracelets. And if you tell a student, hey, if you raise your hand one time, I may or may not even call on you. I just want you to practice raising your hand. If you raise your hand, I'm just gonna, maybe I'll call on somebody else, but I'll just move my bracelet to the other wrist. And if I do that, and if I have a bracelet on this other hand, by the other end of the day, me and you are gonna have an agreement. I'm gonna put a star in my little notebook here, or my grade book. And that's gonna be part of your participation grade. And sometimes I may call on you, and sometimes I may not. But let's just increase privately and have an agreement that you're going to start engaging more. Maybe it's not bracelets, maybe it's notes, maybe it's some kind of tally system. Maybe the student has their own tally system inside of their favorite novel, like they have a Goosebumps novel or Harry Potter novel or whatever, and they have a little private thing, tally system inside that they're just writing tallies about their own hand raising. And as you come around the class, and you already would proactively have a class-wide system in place so that you're not stigmatizing the student. Oh, let me check your guys' notebooks or whatever. Make sure that you're checking to say like, okay, I see you, good job keeping track of your behavior. Private agreements can be really helpful for apprehensive learners. Avoid any embarrassment at all costs. And I left "you never know" as open-ended because you never know what that student is going through. You never know what they've experienced that morning. You never know if they had good sleep, had a good breakfast. You never know if they're grieving something. You never know if they got embarrassed in the bathroom with the other kids. You never know. You never know. And for you to embarrass another student or to allow them to be embarrassed by other people, unacceptable, can't happen, right? We cannot be the adults in charge of the room and to either foster or permit and just turn a blind eye to stigmatizing or embarrassing situations. We have to be in the trenches, rolling our sleeves up and insisting that students feel comfortable and making sure we're doing everything in our power to make sure that that happens. That promotes a lot of inclusion, again, across learning types. So praise one step up rather than always aiming for perfection. Perfection is the enemy of progress. Students who feel like they can't do something, when they try and fail, they are living in that fixed mindset. They're not living in a growth mindset. We need to tell them that when they try, that their effort is what is rewarded. Their study habits, their trying, their attempts, their approximations, their winning attitude, that those are the things that we value. Because if all we care about is hundreds on tests, we're going to miss a ton of kids. We're going to miss the opportunity to reach the kids who need us the most, and we're going to miss the opportunity to help foster a love of learning and inspiration for students who might feel bored or not care or have been burned by other past teachers. So make sure that you're not just looking to get a good grade yourself as a teacher, and make sure that as you're promoting this inclusive environment, that you're having a growth mindset yourself and you're tracking your own progress. Okay, all the students failed that test. Whew, okay, we gotta back things up a little bit. We gotta make sure that we're providing enough scaffolding. We're using mnemonic devices. We're using lots of behavior plans. We're using subtle supports. We're using things that's gonna reach a lot of kids. And how are we going to address it? How am I gonna grow from that experience as the teacher? I have seen teachers come in after grading a bunch of tests and just yell at the kids. Just yell at them and say, I can't believe you all bombed this test. The highest grade in the room was a 72. What happened? Why don't you? What happened is that your teaching wasn't effective. That's what happened. It's a reflection on what you taught, or it's a reflection on the assessment not being appropriate to what you taught. Sometimes the assessment itself was just too hard, but the teaching was actually fine, but the assessment went far away from where the teaching was. Maybe the teaching stopped here and the assessment was over there, or maybe the teaching was about most of the content, but miss bridging into a more complex presentation of the content. So make sure that you are not teaching to the test, of course, but that your assessments are matching what you're actually doing in the room. That's a way to make sure that you are having a growth mindset for yourself and for your students, and to let them know, hey, okay, we all got a bad grade here. If you guys got a bad grade, I got a bad grade. Let's fix it. Workshop the test right now. What was hard for you? Let's all raise our hands. You know what? I found X, Y, and Z tricky. Who else found that tricky? Let's all talk about this. If we all can talk about doing our best together, then there's no bad questions. Then there's no calling people out who did poorly in the test. There's not saying it's on you to do more work rather than it's on me to provide the scaffolding and to provide the support for you. We have so many different learners, and as our slide said before, we have so many different learners with so many different needs in the room. And we have to make sure that they don't feel like perfection is the goal. Because with social media, there's a lot of that already in their lives. Girls constantly, or guys constantly filtering their photos, cropping everything, changing things, eye widening, leg lengthening, guys looking like they're bulked up, virtual backgrounds, virtual perfection, right? We have this whole aim on kids in society broadly, not us as teachers. In society broadly, there's this whole aim for kids to be amazing, be rich and be beautiful and be perfect. And that is the enemy of progress. If you are trying to reach any goal, the scientifically proven way to get to those goals is through systematic steps that promote lasting change. So if we're constantly just putting kids on a roller coaster of reaching for perfection and failing, reaching for perfection and failing, then of course they're going to burn out. They're going to start engaging in some masking behaviors or some behaviors that just hide the issue and just showcase what they're good at and just ignore that other stuff, or things that will just distract from the issue, like, oh, I'm funny and clownish and engage in these other behaviors because that's easier for me to deal with than the real issue at hand. So if you, on the alternative side, have an environment that really supports progress and that increases in scores or increases in study habits or increases in attitude and engagement and motivation, that those are valued, recognized, and reinforced, that that's what you're actually going to provide reinforcement for, not just GPA, then you will have kids who are more willing to succeed, more willing to try hard, more willing to explore, more willing to fail and get back up again, and who will strive to continue to learn and be inspired. And that is our job. And we have an inclusive world where people are advocating constantly for support and change and acceptance, mental health acceptance, autism acceptance, all types of things that we have to accept are part of this world. It is a beautifully decorated world of many shapes, sizes, and colors, and needs and challenges and strengths. So we need to make sure that we are part of that we are not only leading that movement for ourselves and for our professional peers, but for our students, that they're going to be advocates for those changes and advocates for those supportive environments for their own next future lives and their own families and for their own collaborative workspaces, right? We want our students to be functional, healthy adults. So when we want to work with them in school, we have an opportunity to be advocates for those things. Don't aim for perfection. Don't aim for everybody getting the best grade ever. Aim for and value and strive for a classroom that is collaborative, truly inclusive, truly accepting, and have constant class-wide supports and systems in place and routines and differentiated instruction and all types of thoughts and intentional behaviors on your part that make all of that possible. Thank you.
That was excellent, Marcia. Fantastic.
Thank you.
So would you be surprised that when I was in 5th grade, Mr. Madigan, who was our teacher, he had the A row, the B row, the C row, the D row, the F row. And every quiz or test, everybody shuffled their seats. That's just the way
That's
it
so
was.
terrible.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
So bad. Why? You know, like what
That's,
use did that have?
that's
I
why.
mean, I understand the old school mentality. I don't necessarily get it, but I do understand it. And I think it was just, you know, if we embarrass people enough, they'll rise to the occasion.
Right.
Yeah, terrible.
All right. So do you think that typical kids should be allowed to move at their own pace?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I think that neurotypical kids in typical education should be engaged in learning processes that promote their acceleration through things. If they're able to understand and get through material quickly, why are we having them rehearse it for so long? It's a big waste of time. And if they need more support and time, or they need steps back to work on something more, then absolutely we should do that as much as possible. I don't think the system itself is set up for that. And a lot of teachers and researchers are trying to advocate for change, because individualized education plans are the only contracts we have, and they fail a lot. Education itself should be more individualized than it is now for every student.
Yep. So now would be a good time to plug Dr. Kim Barron's book.
Oh my gosh.
That everybody should get. But,
blind spots. Everybody should get blind spots. I'm not a paid spokesperson, but I am a free spokesperson.
Yeah.
It is such a good book. And she really highlights the systemic issues that are keeping the failure of the education system in place. And she talks about and addresses the people involved who are maintaining these systems, the cultural norms that we have that are maintaining these systems, and talks about ways to change it and how we should be looking at our students and how we should be intervening and teaching them more effectively.
Certainly makes sense. So the next question is, how would you target social behaviors in an inclusive classroom?
So social behaviors meaning social skills like
Yes.
conversations, and yeah. So I think you could start with an RTI model. If you're thinking about social skills that, let's say, a few of your students struggle with, and mainly one student or two students have the most difficulty with it, but that you want to make sure that certain collaborative or social skills are built up in your room. So you can start by stepping back and thinking of the big picture of what this student needs to be able to do that they're not currently doing. So let's say, for example, they're not engaged in greetings and reciprocal conversation. So Ray, you and I know that sometimes reciprocal conversation can be very difficult to teach. So if you have a student who has great academic skills, no real stigmatizing or disruptive behaviors, and they can thrive in a neurotypical setting, but they don't have the social skills to boot, then, you know, that's definitely something that needs to be helped. And perhaps the teacher in the room doesn't have a ton of learning history with working with students with those types of needs. So think big about it first. What does this kid really need to be able to do in this room? Or what should they be able to learn by the end of the year or by the next couple of years? If it's just greetings, let's say, and reciprocal conversation, and you want to just be able to have a quick back and forth with them because their, say, shyness or their lack of responsiveness to their peers is stigmatizing for them, and maybe they've expressed that they'd like to be more involved, they just don't respond appropriately. And then you have some other students who engage in some off-task behavior, or they have some attitude, or they don't respond well. So we have to think about it big first. We can think about giving some lessons and starting a class-wide system of politeness and of manners, and that we're going to start reinforcing those types of behaviors and identify them specifically, model them, have the whole class work with you on what the expectation is. So, hey class, we're going to start working on some manners, and we're going to start working on respectful conversation in the room. So when I say this to you, you say this back, and you do this direct instruction, let's say, as an example, and you start working on manners and pro-social behaviors in the room class-wide. And then everybody knows now that this is the expectation, that you're going to be reinforcing those behaviors. You have a contingency in place, a class-wide contingency that could be interdependent. So when everybody in the room does these things, we're all going to earn something. Or maybe it's independent, and when I catch individuals doing this, they each get their own star chart or whatever it is. So you can make it tailored to the whole room, individuals, right? In that other workshop, we talk really in detail about those types of contingencies. So you can apply those things to manners, and then think about it in the RTI model. So now you have class-wide some increases in the behavior. Then you have a few kids who aren't making the strides that the other kids are making. And of course, that includes that one student that was having the most difficulty. Okay, so now you start pulling that small group or addressing that small group and saying, all right, guys, we're going to role play a little bit. And I have extra in this small group contingencies for how you respond in group, and start doing more explicit one-on-one instruction with those kids. And then you pull it down to the individual level. Okay, Johnny, the whole class is earning X, Y, and Z. We've worked on this class-wide. We've worked on this small group-wise. Now you and I need to have an agreement that when you come in the room and I say hello to you, your first step is just to say hello back. Maybe I don't need you to look at me. Maybe you do. Or maybe it's I just want you to look and wave to me and just say, hey, and then you can keep it going. I promise not to pull you aside for conversation, because maybe the student is avoiding the social interaction because they're afraid if I start the greeting or start the conversation, it's going to snowball into a place, and I don't have the social skills to navigate that. So I promise that if I say hi to you, you say hi back, I'm going to leave you alone. I'm not going to say, well, how's your day and how's it going? How's your blah, blah, blah. So I'll just leave you alone. And you have a private agreement with that student. And you start building in some basic social skills and a level of trust that you're going to work on that slowly with them. Then you can work on them in the small group or in the one-on-one on some reciprocal conversation skills. And you increase the goal systematically in a way that suits them and actually increases their skill. Social skills are hard in a neurotypical environment where you have 20-something kids, and you want to make sure that everybody is vibrant and available and confident in their social skills, because some kids are going to be more adept to that than others. I remember a 5th grade room that I worked in. There was a girl who did not speak English. She came in completely from another country like that week and got enrolled in school. So she had 0 exposure to English and had no English skill. And I normalized for her speaking her language, which was Spanish. So I would just greet her in her language, and then everybody else kind of just followed suit because I had a really good relationship with the other kids in the room. So when I did it and normalized it, then it was not a big deal. And we just made learning Spanish for her engagement a normal thing. And then if she needed to learn English, she could easily ask somebody or ask me, how do you say this thing? Or what's this called? And everybody was really supportive about it. That's not easy to accomplish in some settings because the foundations are not there, right? You have this like restrictive environment and people don't feel comfortable, or you have this really didactic instruction style and everybody has to rise to the occasion, that's not going to foster engagement. So if we're actually looking to foster social skills, we have to make sure that we're mindful of it in like the most proactive sense possible. And then as we start working on the expectations and we make it comfortable, we make it normal to be working on these things. Hey, we're all working on being polite here. So if somebody just doesn't say please to you, you address that, you redirect it. If somebody doesn't say thank you, you address that. If people are calling out over each other, that your class-wide understanding is that we are all working on this and we all have room to grow, not just like we're all cool and Johnny needs to change. That's not inclusion, right? So when we're talking about inclusion, we have to think about RTI, scaffolding, and that can definitely be applied to social skills.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what, let's see, it says, what criteria do you have for kids with autism to be in regular ed? That's a really big question.
Yeah, there's no criteria.
So
There's no criteria. There's no criteria at all. For kids with autism can be anywhere they want to be. You know, like again, we don't place students in settings based on diagnosis ever, ever, ever. That's not what the law says, right? So that shouldn't be the way we do it. And if school or staff or parents are suggesting that type of thing, then we need to pause and think twice about that. I mean, I took a quiz one time way early in my career, and I was the only one who got the answers right, because the questions were, can someone with autism, and then like a million things, right? Get married, have children, run a business, blah, 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 drive a car. And I was so surprised because there's all these like people around that were checking yes and no on these things. And I was like, just straight line, yes, right? Of course. There's nothing about autism that lends itself to like a box. Are there certain tendencies that obviously must be present for a person to have an autism diagnosis? Yeah, but the way that they're expressed is completely different across individuals. So I've seen people with autism do better in neurotypical classrooms than the rest of the class, right? Right, I know you've seen that too. Where we have like these really well-behaved, super motivated students who are just like eager to learn and happy to be there. And you have these other kids who are like, you know, nodding off or looking away or throwing balls of paper, like, you know, so they're the like the least disruptive people in the room, actually. So I mean, having autism has, to me, there's zero actual criteria there. There's kids who have, I think the only thing I would lean on would be that they are benefiting from the instruction from the teacher. That's it. And then like, that's really up to the teacher, right? If they have the cognitive wherewithal to be in a room amongst their peers, not engage in some wealth of disruptive behavior or whatever, then they should be there. There's no reason why they shouldn't be there. And the teacher's job is to include them in the environment. That's the whole presentation. It's the teacher's job to make that possible.
fantastic. Just amazing presentation, Marcia. I love
Oh, thanks.
praise one step up rather than always aiming for perfection. Perfection is the enemy of progress. I'm going to have to go into my Facebook page where it says favorite quote. It's going to be perfection is the enemy of progress is my new favorite quote. Awesome.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you, Marcia. That was fantastic.
Oh, I didn't give my last word though.
Sure.
So my last word is supports. That's the final keyword, is supports. As always, the child does not learn in the way we teach. We change the way we teach. That's the whole point, right? And that's the whole thing about inclusion, is that we have to make sure we are teaching to their needs, not that they are, you know, not able to do what we are doing and we just keep doing what we're doing. That's not acceptable. So I would like to say thank you to everyone who's attending and anyone who watches our video later, and good luck with all of this. Teaching is hard, hard, hard work. I love teachers. We recently had Teacher Appreciation Week. Teachers are incredible human beings who put a lot on the line every day and sacrifice a lot for their students. And the best teachers are inspirational teachers that are remembered by their students for the way that they treated them, and the way that you treat your teachers, and the way you teach your students and the way you treat your students is the way that they will remember you. They might not remember how to find the area of a cube. They might not remember the president or all the capitals of the states, but they will remember how they felt in your room. And teachers are the most incredible people ever. And I know I'm biased, but you know, bioengineers are incredible people. Space explorers are incredible people. Heart surgeons are incredible people, but they were all students at one time. They were all students with teachers at one time, and how those teachers made them feel and how they got inspired are, you know, the most crucial people to me around. So thank you all for being here, and good luck to all of our teachers and parents. And please follow us on social media. Our Instagram, our Facebook, even our TikTok is full of cool, fun information. And our YouTube is where we place all of our free workshop videos that are there for anyone to view at any time. And you can follow us on Twitter. Thank you, everybody.